Okay, good morning. Welcome to staff meeting, March 18th. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Also appreciate the flexibility to be able to move staff meeting to today. Manager Stoltz had some planned travel, so he won't be with us this morning. But we have Tim Kaufman in this place. We're going to do 4 bills that we need approval of letters for our legislative platform and legislative agenda. We're going to do RHID, which should be a lively discussion. Then we're going to talk debt policy, which could be even more of a lively discussion. Wouldn't you think, Lindsay? Probably not. Okay. Mr. Kaufman, you want to direct traffic? Tanya.
Okay, good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Late Friday, I sent out an email that included 3 letters for your review and approval. So I'd like to, if we can, just this morning, real briefly go over the 3 letters. And then I have a 4th one that regards homeless. It is, and if I can go over that one real quickly, because that is the one that has the most urgent timeline. We talked about this on Friday. It is Senate Bill, I think 542. And when we talked about it on Friday, it did not have a hearing, but I let you know it is exactly the same bill as House Bill 2723. Just found out this morning through Jason's letter, or excuse me, that his newsletter that he puts out, that there is a hearing tomorrow at 10:30. So the letter that I've included is what we sent up for the House Bill 2723. So if you are okay with it, what we would do is basically send up the same letter, but just change the title, of course, to the appropriate committee. And then just reference the Senate bill because it is the exact
same bill, right?
As the House bill. So if you're okay with that, we're going to get this up just as urgently as we can because again, the hearing is tomorrow at 10:30. So that
we're sending the same letter that we sent for HB 2723. Right. Any objections to that? Yep, that's it. Any objections? I think we're good.
Okay. 542. Okay, and then the next 2 letters that I want to reference and got a lot of assists on this between Tom Henry, Lindsay Poverso, and Mark Clark. And so I want to just thank them because they put a great piece of written testimony together. I'll start off with the first one, House Bill 5025. This is before you for your review. And then 1611 as well. A little bit of differences between the 2, but that is before you for your review and approval. I'm happy to read it out loud if you wish, or just if you want to just take some time and review that real quick. We do need to get this up to Topeka today because the hearing is tomorrow. My understanding from Jason is that we can only have 1 speaker per municipality, county, or entity. And so as I understand, I think Commissioner Howell will be going up tomorrow. Is that correct?
I have a schedule challenge I need to work out. So right at the moment, I don't think I can make it unless I can work out my conflict. So I would be willing to do by Zoom, but I'd really rather have someone in front of them. So I'd be willing to concede to yield to anybody that can go up. And again, if I can work out my schedule, I would love to do this.
Yeah, we had talked about it. I have a speaking engagement, a luncheon that I'm doing, and I put this organization in quite a bind if I back out at this time. So
this is going to be an hour and a half long scheduled hearing. It could go a little bit longer, and opponents will be last. So we probably won't see opponent testimony begin until probably at least 45 minutes past 3:30. So 4:15 would be the earliest I would expect to see opponent testimony. I have a speaking engagement in Wichita at 6:30. So.
3:30.
I guess I'll let you know if I can work that out. But I'm willing to do by Zoom. But if I can work it out, I'd rather be there. Or if somebody else wants to do it, I'd be glad to yield to them.
Okay. I want to try to work that thing out and see what we can do. I would agree. I think it's helpful to have someone on site and present. This is a big deal. So I might even be able to send a message. Let me see if I can get out of what I'm needing to do too. And but we'll work that out, Jim. You and I can talk through
that. This would be yes, correct. This would be the written testimony for HCR 2601, and then SCR 1611.
Yeah, so right now the letters are incorrect on these.
Commissioner Howe, you saying you see some corrections you
I
want
think
to make?
he's seeing that it's referencing House Bill 5025, and I've referenced them as HCR 5025 and SCR 1611, so we can make that change.
Okay. Any other corrections you that we want to make here?
Let me just
That's mostly just because since the Great Recession, that's how we've tracked our data and reported out on this stat sheet. Because that's when a lot of the state actions really started having effect. If you recall, LABTR, CCRS, those kinds of things, legislative exemption of machinery and equipment. That's when that all started really being felt. Sure, or we could even say since the Great Recession. You're exactly right. Well, I mean, it's really whatever the commission would prefer, and if you prefer, we go back and put that on a 10-year basis, or however you want to do it, we can sure do that, whatever makes the most sense, I think. I think we had talked about maybe providing this handout as an attachment for education, and so if that's the case, then I would think we want to keep it to what's currently in there. We can update the language to describe what it is, but if this is going to be a handout, we probably should keep it that 2008/Great Recession.
I knew what 2008 meant.
whoever does present, assuming someone does actually verbally present, I would like to see that as an attachment stapled to the testimony and some reference on the front here to the attachment will be explained. And again, I would walk them through the couple top lines on that and that bottom line, that $530 million difference in funding over that period. To me, that sheet speaks volumes. If they understand what that means, that is the best testimony we have.
Probably,
Oh, you're good.
there's probably,
You might need that mic though, Commissioner Meister.
there's probably specific years and, I mean, we got to highlight some of the boxes that you speak
Sure.
to, that we speak to, that would be, I get the red and the black, but you know, if there's 1 year, one item, especially the final items, we ought to highlight those in the yellow or something.
Lindsay, would it be fair I did some analysis this weekend on SCR 1611, that 4% cap. Was that a fair thing to share here?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about, Mark, thank you for, where is Mark? He's behind me. He's behind me. Mark, thank you for sending me the sales data for the 16,000 roughly residential properties that sold in the previous year. I did a couple of things. Number one, I did a plot of sales price versus appraised price. It's a scatter graph. It's very interesting, I think, and it shows that the sales price on one axis and the appraised price on the other. Ideally, if Jesus was the appraiser, that would be a single line going right through all that data because he's perfect, right? But because we have errors, the sales prices might be slightly different than the appraised prices. The formula that creates the trend line is y equals mx plus b. The m obviously is that's the slope that corrects one axis to the other. That's a 3.3% error. And basically, and Mark did it the right way. A 3.3% error says that the appraised price times adding 3.3%, there's 103, take it times 103.3, or sorry, 1.033 will give you the sales price. In other words, sales prices are slightly above appraised prices. And that's exactly what I would argue that actually is what we would want to be. It's very, very much matches a goal of what we would want an appraisal system to look like. The variation off that line shows you the errors. In other words, if things are appraised much different than sales prices, those are errors. And the width of that scatter is indicative of errors in the system that we're trying to work out through appeals and that type of thing. But the chart is actually very interesting. It really backs up what happens with 16,000 sales in Sedgwick County. That is a very impressive chart. To have that M in that formula be at 3.3% is just incredibly low number. Second thing I'd say is I did some numbers. I pretended that if everything in Sedgwick County that was above 4%, I added a column to bring it down to 4%. So if you look at every property, we talked about 60% of the properties had an increase in value. The median increase was 10%, and the median decrease was 4%. 1% of the properties decreased. 39% had no change. The average of all those properties, the average was about 6.7% increase. That's an average. That takes the no change, the decreases and the increases all together. If you do that with the cap installed, if you take anything above 4%, bring it down to 4% and redo that math, that brings that number down to 2.6%. 2.6. With inflation rate of about 5% last year, that shows you the problem this is going to create. We're not going to keep up with just the simple rate of inflation. There's nothing else. In other words, about 2/3 of the property tax increase we might be able to capture. If we wanted to capture it, 2/3 of the increase goes away under SCR 1611. It limits us. The only other option then is to cut things like public safety or taking care of infrastructure or a mill levy increase. They're forcing us into it. We have no other choices. Now, if there's inefficiencies and that type of thing in the system we can use to capture those inefficiencies to balance that, that's great. But if we don't have that available, then you're left with cutting services or raising the mill levy. And I'll argue we don't have a lot to cut. This sheet kind of proves that. So they're putting us in a pickle. Those three pieces of data together, I know it's technical, but if you really understand what's going on here, this SCR 1611 and the other one's not much better. In my opinion, it really forces us to raise the mill levy or cut things people really value. And I had a question this weekend. I'm not sure I got an answer back. Maybe I did. In both of those pieces of legislation, it talks about improvements on property. Again, the exemption, I should say, the tool that might lower your assessed value or lower your appraised value, averaging that over 10 years or being capped at 4%. In either case, if you make an improvement to your property, that doesn't apply to you. And the word improvement, as far as I'm concerned, is not even defined right now. So I think if you pull a permit to replace your roof, for example, or update your siding, I'm not talking about adding on a bathroom. I'm talking about just taking care of your house. If you pull a permit, I think potentially that may be viewed as an improvement, which means they need to be set back to market value. If you've been capped for the last 10 years and you're no longer market value, and suddenly you jump to market value, you're going to pay relevant to other taxpayers more than your fair share because they're paying less than their fair share. So this is creating inequity on purpose. It's on purpose.
When you talk to Jason, Jessica, this is a very easy argument or explanation. Does Jessica and Jason think that members of the state have a grasp of what Jim's just said?
I don't think anybody does. No, nobody up there gets this. I think this is the testimony I would offer. I would say, look, these are great arguments. I hope you read them. I only have 2 minutes, so please read this. But let me tell you something else. This is the argument I would make because I don't think they understand this point. And if someone's underpaying their fair share, it means somebody else is overpaying their fair share. That's by constitutional principle of uniform and equal. Another way to say that is fair. We're unfair on purpose. You guys are creating inequity and non-uniformity. You're doing this on purpose. You're causing someone to underpay, which means somebody else is going to overpay. That's not a solution to property tax growth. It actually just creates chaos. If you really want to cut down property tax growth, give us a different source of revenue. You assume we're frivolous on spending, but if we're not, then what?
Question. So we'll be testifying to these committees. Is there a way that we could really engage the South Central delegation on this? And I think they need to hear exactly what we're talking about and more than 2 minutes worth of an explanation as to why we're fearful of these two concurrent resolutions. Is there a way that we can do this in a practical manner?
So the legislature is going to be out in 3 weeks. They're going to pass a tax bill. They're probably going to pass one of these. It's an election year. There's a few other pieces out there that I think are going to be really hot tickets to get out the door before they adjourn on April the 5th or 6th. There is no opportunity at this point to do this. This is something I wanted to have this conversation in December, because that's the only time we'll have a chance to really get them all together. This is the time of the session right now. They're so incredibly busy. There's so many bills being pushed out right now. You're not going to get an audience of that South Central delegation. I don't think. Our best opportunity really is the committee.
Okay.
So we need to have really effective testimony during this hearing.
Okay. Well, from the letter standpoint, obviously having someone on site is going to be important to submit an oral testimony, the written testimony. Is any other changes that we need to make here?
No, please, go ahead.
On the HB 2025, 5025 letter. Aside from section 2, the first line, adding the Great Recession that I said earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Towards the end was lost because of state action. Besides being a little accusatory, maybe it's state legislative action. I'd add the word legislative action. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 before that, down right underneath that, the impact of state legislative action since 2008. And then I guess it's all right. The very last sentence, HB 5025 does nothing to address anything. Could be said a little better, but that's probably all right. And then in the next section 3, in the second line, the second sentence, starting with changing the assessed percentage, are we suggesting that they just address? Are we saying go ahead and lower the 11.2% or 11.5%?
Residential assessment rate?
Is that what that's saying instead of? Okay. I mean, that's the way it reads. I just want to make sure we're okay with saying that, which
think
I
that's
am.
Based on what the conversation was last Friday or whenever it was that we talked about this. I don't know that would be our druthers.
No, I
But
know.
I think
get
that's
it.
what
Okay.
the commission body had suggested. So I think that's up for discussion if you guys want to
Yeah.
keep it in or edit.
Commissioner Howe, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there is a major party is suggesting a shifting of the assessment rates by lowering residential assessment rate to 9%, which is their proposal. It shifts the burden of government to every other classification of property. And again, one of my arguments is you're just shifting the burden of government from one taxpayer to another is really what you're doing when you make these types of changes. You're not changing fundamentally the demand for dollars to fund public services. None of these proposals get to that point. If all we're talking about is shifting the burden from one taxpayer to another, that's what all these things do. This 9% idea is, I think last week when Mark Clark was talking, he said something about changing the assessment rate. I think that's what I believe this is embodied with this idea of changing the assessment rate for housing from 11.5 down to 9. The Republicans, not to get too partisan here, the Republicans don't support that at all. And it's not going to go anywhere. So it is a bill. It doesn't even have a hearing. But to anybody out there thinks that's another idea to solve a problem, it doesn't solve a problem. It just shifts the burden.
To a commercial properties that are already paying 25% assessed valuation. So, and ag, yes, correct. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and then if I can continue, last thing on section 3, right after that 11.5 suggestion. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, line 6. Would they read that says the assessed value of residential property can decrease without increased administrative overhead? I mean, our clerks do a really good job if they're here, but why is that really an important argument? Does that defer to say it's really a bigger deal than administrative overhead, in my opinion? I'd almost take that out or something, or readjust it. I don't know. I don't want them to read Well, you don't want to do it because you have to have administrative overhead as your only reason for arguing. All due respect to all the administrative overhead people.
Mr. Henry.
Tom Henry, Assistant County Counselor. So the idea behind that third bullet point isn't to suggest that we should reduce the 11.5 percentage. The idea behind it is that HB 5025, instead of looking at last year's residential value, looks at the average of the last 10 years.
Right.
And if you look at over the last 10 years, the because housing prices are going up, essentially what that does is it makes the appraised value for the residential property lower relative to the other property types. So by the statements in there suggesting that if you reduce the 11.5%, it's going to have the same effect. The idea being that, we don't know how they're going to administer the 10-year averages, how that's going to affect appeals and things like that. So what that is saying is we can accomplish what 5025 does through just changing a percentage rather than creating all of this extra work as far as, PVD having to come out with new directives and us having to adjust to that with the appeals process
I
and
get it.
everything that
So,
goes there. So,
because your next couple of sentences below that are really good. They say exactly what you said.
Yeah.
So why don't we take that sentence that I'm talking about and move that to the bottom?
Okay.
Explain all the flaws, meaning the appeals process and blah, blah,
Okay.
blah. And so that's why our suggestion above is administratively better than. Does that make sense to you all?
yeah, I think so.
I don't mean to be. Usually this is Mr. Howell's area of expertise, just helping. Being a wingman.
Well, just for fun, I'll be talking about election integrity tomorrow night if anybody's interested. And that's another one. But let me just say here, there's three arguments we're not really making here. I mean, I like this. I don't know if you want to get to a second page or not. I don't know if I want to do that. I think this paragraph could be reduced a little bit. But let me just say there's 3 points I would love to make. And that is, if they're going to tinker with this type of stuff, do it in statute.
Yeah, don't do it.
Because they're rushing a constitutional amendment. If you put it in front of a people, you vote yes, you get to cut your property taxes. And that's the narrative they're going to come up with. That they are
At the beginning.
absolutely.
You got to say that right at the start. We encourage any adjustments to be statute.
Absolutely. Because if you put it in front of the people, if it's poorly devised solution, which I will argue these are, and people vote for this because they don't, again, I hate to say this, but the people who crafted this, as well as the voters, don't really understand what they're doing. I hate to say it that way. I probably don't want to be offensive by saying that. But at the end of the day, if you put someone in front of someone, if you vote yes, you can cut your taxes in half. They're going to vote yes. But once this is done, you can never fix it. Because it takes another vote. A majority vote of the legislature, as well as actually 2/3 majority vote of the legislature, and a majority vote of the electors to undo what they think is a tax cut. That's not going to happen. And one of the arguments I would say is they did this in statute back in the 1970s, and then they repealed it because it didn't work. That's not in the testimony. That should be said, right? They did this in statute, and they rescinded the law because it doesn't work. It created havoc in the housing markets, in the real estate markets, and the people taking care of their homes. That should be stated. Second of all, I want to say that again, I want to show respect and love and appreciation to the legislature. They answer to the same electors that elected us. They are our boss. The electors are the ones that are going to hold local government officials accountable. If we're being wasteful, I want the people to come after us and hold us accountable. But it's really not the legislators' job to feel like this is their job to hold us accountable. It's really the electors' job. The taxpayers and the electors will, in fact, make sure that we're doing our job well. And I think we should respect the electors by putting that out there. And then finally, our biggest problem right now is we don't have another source of revenue. It does state this in here, the dependency on property tax. Let me just say, I know that Ryan did a great job Friday talking about, was it 16 state programs we run on behalf of the state of Kansas? 16. The revenue for those programs has decreased. The demand for the spending of those programs has increased. The difference there is covered by property tax. We don't have a lot of choice here. We have to do these things. And so at the end of the day, we're having to go to property taxpayers to fund government because every other source of revenue has been eliminated or clamped down in some way that's causing this to happen. So the real problem is they have pushed us into the corner. So the only thing we can do is property taxes. Then they complain that property taxes are too high. I'm sorry, but that you can't have it both ways. So if you really want to solve property tax dependency and the highest, the high property taxes in our state, the biggest problem is we don't have another revenue source. So we should talk about that. But to me, these are arguments I would love to see in this letter. I know they could just be one or two sentences each because whoever's speaking at the pulpit there or the podium can elaborate and say, again, please, and I know we have not talked about this in a group, please don't ever read your testimony. Just look at it and just say, here's what this, if there's a sentence on there that says, there's a point I want to make here, tell them what this is. These are points that should be stated. I'm not sure if we don't state it, who else will? Because no offense to KCCA or KAC or whoever, a lot of these arguments are going to be lost because some of these are the very best arguments to be made. They feel pressure to do something about property taxes, and I agree with them, but this isn't the solution.
Yeah, agreed.
On both of those, some kind of bold statement at the beginning saying, I'll just paraphrase, regardless of what action is taken, we strongly encourage this to be a statute-driven legislation. That should be our first and even our closing statement in order to allow the legislatures to adjust in case there was a mistake. Something like that. In the other letter, same thing, item 2, add after 2008, the Great Recession. Hey, back on the first letter in section 2, second line, levied by the county only increased 38%. Could we take only out? Doesn't sound right.
What's our deadline on these letters?
Well, the hearing is tomorrow at 3:30, so typically it's 24 hours. So we need to get moving on the changes. So we have up there and get the speaker, let them know who the speaker's going to be.
Same thing, the state legislative action. I got it. Not.
So we'll take a rerun at these letters and try to incorporate some of these points, and then you'll circulate these via email. Try to get a consensus on what we do, set the best course of action. And separately, we'll have a conversation about who can't get up. Or at the very least, who is going to be able to testify.
I'm not making any comment at this time. Thanks.
Okay. Last letter.
Okay, last letter is HB 2601, and this is the third or subsequent DUI legislative bill, and this is on our platform. And so this is a very brief letter in support of this bill.
I was able to give this a 1 through, and I'm fine with it. Everybody good with it? Oh, we shall be good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Tom, for the work you've been doing on this. Mr. Kaufman?
Chairman, Commissioners, I'd like Brent Shelton to come up and talk about the reinvestment housing incentive district policy that we'd like to get your opinions on.
Hi, Brent.
Morning, Chairman. Morning, Commissioners. What a better way to start a Monday morning than with 4 potential finance policies. This morning, I want to visit with you a bit about the Reinvestment Housing Incentive District. Now, I've called it a couple of other things. So from here on out, in order to save butchering the name, I'm going to call it the RHID. How's that? But the Reinvestment Housing Incentive District is some amended legislation that allows for some participation in this with the cities in Sedgwick County. What I'd like to do this morning is get your thoughts on the draft of policy that we've had some discussion about so that we can get that in final form for you for approval on Wednesday. I think we're close, but there's probably some tweaks that we need to make in that policy. There we go. So what is RHID? RHID was formerly known as the Rural Housing Incentive District Program, and in 2023, it was expanded. The eligible participation prior to this expansion was in cities with a population below 60,000 and in a county of less than 85,000 in population. So it wasn't eligible for any of the cities in Sedgwick County. Now it's for those same population limits, cities or a county under 85,000. So the cities within Sedgwick County are now eligible to participate and create RHIDs. Also qualified census tracts, which are areas with below median income within that district as identified by the Census Bureau, are eligible to participate. So you can see that that opens up some opportunities within the city of Wichita in those purple areas. You got a better map this morning that's overlaid with the city limits that GIS prepared this morning. So Mike, thank you. That was a very quick turnaround. I'll express to them my thanks for that. But here's a little bit of a blow up of some of those census districts. All of this is inside city limits, except for Oaklawn and Sunview.
I'm sorry, did you say how many of those census tracts there are on this map that are qualified?
It's anything within those boundaries, and they're kind of defined by zip code.
But there's multiple tracks on this map. We don't know how many though. I mean, that are in the purple. I see the purple.
Mhm.
But how many of those are there? Do we know that that kind of matters?
I can get that for
Okay,
you.
thanks.
You're saying zip code, but that's narrower than zip codes. Is it? What is a census tract? Sorry.
A qualified census tract is defined by the Census Bureau, and
Okay.
it's based on average income within that geographic boundary.
Well, it's not a precinct. It's not a zip code.
Mm-mm. No, it's defined by
It's defined by federal rules
Yes.
of census tracking.
Right.
Okay.
The purpose for the RHID, as stated in the statute, is basically to encourage the development and renovation of housing within cities and counties. And it provides some financing mechanism, some public support of the financing of the infrastructure, maybe the land acquisition or some of those renovation costs to support that housing in areas that are experiencing a shortage of housing. Some of the limitations on RHIDs, they're limited to 100 units within a development plan within an RHID. And that's an annual limitation. They can be for sale, they can be for rent. There is a limitation on the size of the residence. The average for the residences within the RHID or within that development plan cannot exceed 1,650 square feet. So you could have 800 square foot houses and you could have 2,000 square foot houses, as long as the average is 1,650 for the dwellings within there.
You want to take questions as we go here?
You bet.
Okay. I'm sorry, you got to finish the slide and I have a question for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And it excludes exterior parts of that dwelling, the garage, the porch, or outbuildings are excluded from that 1,600 square feet, 50 square foot average limitation. Renovations are also eligible. I can see that this being something that would be more in a downtown area to revitalize a downtown or within a qualified census tract. But for instance, a small town might want to renovate second stories of some of the buildings in downtown. That would be eligible way to use RHID financing. If those existing lots that have been sitting there undeveloped, subject to special assessments, that's one of the things that they allow. and older buildings within those qualified census tracts are eligible to receive RHID financing support.
So question for you, Brent.
You bet.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Mhm.
This also does not include a basement if it's unfinished.
That is correct.
So it doesn't mean someone couldn't finish a basement after this incentive is in place. And it wouldn't disqualify them necessarily if they were to start the incentive and finish a basement. But once the incentive has begun, it doesn't necessarily interrupt that anyway.
That is correct.
Okay. And then the purpose of this incentive has nothing to do with affordable housing, apparently. It doesn't state that in the purpose.
It does not state that in the purpose, but as you get into the statute, there's some discussion or some language around affordable housing. And I think the square footage limitation is a way to kind of point to that, to affordable housing.
But I would argue that a 3,300 square foot home on average, some of them could be bigger than that. It could have a 2, 3 or a 3-car garage and a 15,000 square foot lot with a swimming pool. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's affordable housing. It doesn't really mean that, right? I mean, it could be, that's a $500,000 home perhaps.
That is correct. Yeah, you're spot on with that analysis.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Three things I want to point out about RHID. One is that the way the RHID works is it captures all the incremental taxes, the incremental increase in real estate taxes that are created by a housing development project for a period of up to 25 years. Basically, the thing there is to know is that any property tax levied fund that real estate pays to, they're going to be frozen at a base level for those districts, and all the incremental taxes from that incremental increase will go to the RHID for that period of time.
That's city, county, township, school districts,
Fire district.
everything.
Everything
is frozen.
correct.
But when we've discussed before, fire district, we could not exempt out of that.
That is correct. Everybody plays. The second bullet point, and this is something that I don't think we've discussed, is that within an RHID, there can be multiple projects. And each one of these projects can run for 25 years. So as they are capturing incremental value and incremental tax revenue within the district, across the entire district, you can have a project, next year, another project, 15 years from now, another project. They'll all go for 25 years. So that's just like a project plan within a tax increment financing. So without limitations, this can go, there really isn't a 25-year limitation necessarily.
Hey, Brent, who makes the decision on that? Clarify if you don't mind when you say there really isn't a 25-year limitation. Who makes that decision to continue, or what does that look like into an option period?
Once the district is established, unless it's nullified by one of the governing bodies that can nullify it, it's up to the city that created the RHID to continue with a new development project. The city or the county that initiated it is organized the RHID.
So is this rolling? Does it add, say this first project has been in place 10 years and they get a new project, does that reset the clock on the first one to 25 more years?
That's what I was,
That's how I read it.
that was a question. I was trying, thank you for asking that, because I was trying to process that in my mind. Okay.
And that's consistent with the way tax increment finance works today. The revenue that's derived from the RHID can either reimburse eligible incurred costs, or if the municipality that establishes the RHID has special revenue bonds, some sort of debt, then the RHID incremental revenue can pay those bonds. And there are just four of the things that could be used, eligible expenses under an RHID, and there are a number of others.
Very first one, land acquisitions, I would have a lot of heartburn with that.
Mhm.
You could have a developer saying that this land is going to cost me millions of dollars, and now suddenly why that's going to be included. I don't, is there any way of exempting land acquisition?
You could have us craft that into the policy that the county will not support an RHID that reimburses a developer for land acquisition, or you could nullify one that comes to you because that's a policy consideration. So it can be done on a case-by-case basis. We've tried to put a lot of guardrails in the policy to give you some discretion because of the differences you might see.
But I didn't see anything about land acquisition in the policy you wrote.
No, it's not. I mean, you could exclude it. You could say that's part of the adverse effect on the county and nullify it. So we can add it.
And while you're on this slide, the things that you identified in there, site preparation, grading, paving, street light fixtures, today those are handled by specials. So what is the advantage to the city by including this as an RHID as opposed to doing specials? Because it has tremendous disadvantage to the county by them doing this.
Mhm. And that's part of what they have to prove is, as we get in a little deeper in the policy, we got to prove that the shortage exists, that this is going to be, this type of incentive would be required to get some sort of economic development. But it would come right out of all their other levied funds to support this rather than having the developer or the landowner pay those special assessments.
Well, let me go one step further then. What this does is it exempts all of these properties for 25 years. So the people are still paying property tax, but it's all going to reimburse this RHID bond or however that they fund this thing. So that then takes and transfers the burden of government from this RHID to every other property taxpayer in Sedgwick County.
Mhm.
You could have 6 of them, say, in District 3, and none of them in District 1, but District 1 taxpayers are going to be paying for the District 3 improvements.
Exactly right.
So is that fair? Is it fair to transfer the burden of government from this RHID group of people to all of the other taxpayers in the county?
I've got.
I'm
real
watching you,
issues with
Brent. Let's
that.
see what you.
Yeah, I've got problems with that myself. Yes.
I was wondering if he was going to answer that. I'm looking at this census tract map and looking, can this be on top of other TIF districts that are already established?
One in the middle is.
I'm looking at it. Yeah, I see it.
And I'm not sure how we would administer that because the TIF district, we've already established a base value for the TIF district. There'd be a new base value for this. And the TIF district's eligible for all of this incremental revenue. I just don't know how we would administer it.
Me either, which is why I asked.
Yeah,
Well, maybe just.
and the
one
experts
policy would
that
be-
do it are in the room and they're shaking their head as well. I think it would be nearly impossible to do.
Okay.
We could say it's not eligible if it's in a TIF district in a policy.
And we
Right.
could, yeah, that'd just be one of the policy considerations. The only way to generate that revenue would be to distribute more than we collect. That's definitely adverse effect.
Good question.
Well, and to that extent, I wonder vice versa. If an RHID comes first, does that preclude the TIF?
I don't know how you have two base values.
I don't either.
Yeah, that's my,
Two sets of increment.
I just don't see
you
anything
can't
in
do
it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's, the legislation is silent to that, but I just don't know how you do it.
Brent, on that third bullet, incurred costs or pay debt. So
Or both.
it's, it could be either
Mhm.
or both. So a developer could have some reimbursement, and if the city did the bonds, then they'd have to figure all that out.
Sure. You could have a developer that's already acquired the land.
Yeah.
Bring up the development, the city puts in the infrastructures,
Right.
does bonds for that.
Couple more questions on that. So if someone expanded the project, is there a presumption this is approved, or do we even have a chance to vote to reapprove, or do we have a chance to deny at that point? It's uncontrolled. They can continue to add to the project and reset that clock as many times as they want, as long as they want. Okay,
Yes, once that district's approved, it exists.
okay. Is there any way to write this in such a way that when the infrastructure is made whole with the deferred in other words, like a TIF, the homeowner or the occupant of the property through the rent, okay, is paying a property tax out, but that rather than going to normal government, it's being intercepted and reapplied, if you will, to pay off government bonds for the infrastructure, let's say special assessments. Is there a way to write this in such a way that when the assessments are paid in full, that incentive is suspended?
Yes, you can do that. What I would recommend, and we got some language in the policy, proposed policy that says if you want to place a limitation on the term, the dollar amount, or any limitation, that the city and the developer would put that in the development agreement. They would put it in their ordinance. We'd put it in the resolution. So there's nothing, if you cut it off in 5 years or 15 years, that everybody agreed to that on the front end.
Okay, and then is it possible? I'm just trying to understand the importance of potentially why this even exists at all. It is possible the cost of infrastructure has gotten to the point, is it, I don't know what the average specials are in a residential neighborhood are today, a new subdivision. I don't know what the specials would be. Let's just say it's $40,000. Okay. If the specials gets to the point where you build a new constructed home, say it's a 2,000 square foot home on a normal subdivision, and because they're trying to capture the cost and a normal profit for the developer, the price is getting so high that they can't market at that price. It gets above market because the costs are so high. He has no incentive to do it any longer because his profit margin is gone. Let's say, right. If that's what's going on, then this, I think, is a Band-Aid to a bigger problem, really. The bigger problem is the cost of housing has got to the point that, again, if a developer can't make a reasonable profit, they're not going to put their neck on the line to hold all that liability responsibility to actually sell property that they may not sell at a price point that makes it worth their time. So the cost of infrastructure has gotten so high, and the cost of labor and materials has gotten so high that the market value of that home that he's building brand new with the specials added is no longer a market price. It's something they can't know. The person's not going to spend $500,000 for a 2,000 square foot home. It's just out. It just doesn't make sense any longer. Right. So what this does, it eliminates, if you will, the cost of specials to theoretically bring the price down. They can market it. The problem is we have no guarantee that the price would actually come down. They're still going to sell that at a market price. And I don't think we don't understand whether this is simply to increase the profit of a developer that's already going to make profit, or if this is something make it where he can make profit where he wants to do it now, because otherwise the math doesn't work. He's not going to build a house he can't make money on. So correct. I'm not sure if we can control that part of this discussion, but it seems to me that there's something in that range. If the problem is he can't make money, he's not going to develop a house that's 2,000 square foot house because the profit's gone because infrastructure has gotten so expensive. If that's what's going on here, this is a way around that problem. But the problem is we've had all these other subdivisions across the county that have paid for their own specials. So it can increase inequity in the housing market once again.
I agree with everything you just said. I will tell you a couple of things.
One of my problems, I guess, I'm trying to figure out how whether this actually pads the pockets of the developers or just makes it where it can be done. Mm-hmm. And those two, I see either one of those options is possible. I just don't know where we are on each one of these.
A couple of things that could potentially be done. We've seen some housing plans with a small city in the county that limits the use of our HID to housing that's affordable for people at a certain level below the median average income. I mean, that's a way to do it. I don't know how you govern it in the out years if something changes. So that's one possibility for doing that. The other thing is some sort of a shorter time frame, or just limiting those things that the RHID participation would be allowed to do. I mean, there's some ways you can do it. But
Hey, Brent, I see the
Once again.
considerations at the end. Why don't we try to get through the rest of it
okay,
and then get to the considerations? I will give Rusty, our appraiser, and our clerk a heads up that I think we're gonna have some questions for you. So you might formulate kind of an idea of your opinion on this, particularly in public safety and this, so.
basically, real quickly, the process that the city has to go through to establish one, they've got to get approval from the Department of Commerce at the state before it would come to the county to be reviewed. Once one of these RHIDs would be approved by ordinance by a city, it could come to the Board of County Commissioners for consideration. Now, you're one of 3 types of governments that can nullify this. Any city that's within 3 miles of this RHID may also vote to nullify it if they determine it has an adverse effect on them.
Wow.
Any school district that would overlap with the RHID has the ability to nullify that within 30 days of the passing of that ordinance and notification to these governing bodies. As Commissioner Meitzner mentioned earlier, these do affect the county fire district. So we're going to look at adverse effects on the fire district as well as any other public safety agencies exist. And we've got some minimum data requirements that line up with the things that they have to provide to Commerce, with the addition of a feasibility study that shows they have to have it in order to make this work. The but-for. Within our policy, I've got 3 items of focus. Number 1, that we really have to identify that there's a shortage of housing that's not going to be fixed through market activity. And number 2, that shortage of housing within that community is a substantial deterrent to economic growth. And we've put some things in the policy about what types of economic growth. If the shortage of housing got solved and that meant that they got a Subway sandwich shop, probably we don't want to incentivize that. But if it was an industrial facility, a distribution that was going to employ 30 or 40 people, bring value-added work, jobs with benefits and so forth to the area, that might be something that we could start to wrap our arms around. And the third thing is that the incentive is required. There's no other way to do it without RHID. What is that but for? And then when it comes to the county, if we determine that there's adverse effect to the county, that's the grounds for nullification. We've got 6 potential things in the policy that would cause you to say, we don't want to go forward with this. One is that it hinders public service delivery. What does 100 rooftops do to fire protection or EMS? The economic infeasibility of the project without the incentive, that's the but-for that needs to be proven. We want to make sure that the developers got enough skin in the game. That's why one of the things written in the policy is we would prefer to reimburse a developer than to do it through debt financing and use this tool to pay their special assessments. But if they've fronted all those infrastructure investment, well, maybe we can help with some of that reimbursement. I think that would be preferred over the other method. Do the public benefits outweigh the public costs? If an RHID came before us without any limitations, I'll probably tell you it's got adverse effect and hope you would vote that one down. But if you can go in and say, we might do it for this period of time, this makes sense, or we would participate up to this much money, some sort of limitation around it. You don't want a new development to occur. Those kinds of things could be limitations in there. And if we always like to work with the cities on the front end of these. So if they're thinking about one, come to us. We'll talk through it, see what makes sense for everybody. 30 days is going to be a pretty tight window to review it if that's the first time we start seeing financials. So if we don't have enough data to review it, we don't want to go forward. One, if an RHID is approved and would go into effect, these 4 offices will all be involved. That base value is established at the parcel level. The clerk's going to roll that up. They're going to create a new district or districts, depending on who the tax entities are. GIS is going to develop a layer. We're going to want to make sure that the legal description that they provide actually closes and isn't open-ended. And then annually, there's activity that has to go on. That's a real high level. There's a lot more work than that happens, but some is automated and some is manual. But there's some things that have to be done annually to do it. Some considerations. If you have preferences that you would like for us to include in policy, we can. The needs within the city of Wichita are different than the needs in the suburbs. Is urban infill a better approach for this, for the county's perspective? Because infrastructure is already there. So you're not going to have that as much of that issue. The pay-as-you-go versus debt financing and the discussion that we've had about special assessments. What sorts of economic growth? Do you want to delineate any of that in policy? I would like to see a city have a comprehensive housing plan of some sort that this supplements, rather than they're just responding to a developer's request for some incentive. Some different types of limitations that you might want to put into policy, or know that we could do these things on a case-by-case basis. How much incremental revenue? Do you want to limit the eligible expenses? Do you want to shorten the term? You want something, as Commissioner Howell has talked about, to make sure it's affordable housing. You favor owner occupied versus rental or not? I mean, those are just things to consider, and there are probably some other things as well. So with that, let's open the discussion again. I got a red pencil to make notes that we can incorporate in.
Well, this is all very new information. This just came about recently, and we're kind of in a knee-jerk reaction to this. And we're trying to get something on our agenda so that we can pass it Wednesday, so that we know which direction we're going. We haven't even talked to the planning department. I can tell you right now, there are tons of developments going on in my district. You can't drive anywhere without running into something that's happening. So is this needed? Have we considered everything? I know that you and Valerie have been working on this ever since it came up, but have we talked to planning? Have we talked to the appraiser? Have we talked to the treasurer? Have we talked to the register of deeds, the county clerk? Have we done all of the research? I don't believe we have. I think Wednesday, what we need to have on the agenda is a moratorium on this for 6 months, so that we can go through and analyze everything that we don't know right now, because there's just too much that we don't know. And Justin's going to shoot me down.
Go ahead, Justin.
Commissioner Dennis, I appreciate the comment. You refer to it as a moratorium, and this isn't quite the zoning context. I think clearly the under these statutes, the RHID statutes, the board has a free hand to not approve any of these. If there was a view that you would have to take them up case by case. I don't think there's any ability to just do a sweeping moratorium. I think you'd have to take action on each one of them as they would come up. But that is an option that the board would have as well, would be to say, if you wanted to have further study on this, that you're not intending to improve any of these. And then, I think we would have to run each one of these in front of you for the analysis that Brent discussed here. And if the board's will was to find that there was an adverse effect up until a policy would be adopted, I still think you need to make some determination on those on a case by case basis. But I do think adopting a comprehensive policy could make sense. I think Brent's done a really good job of putting stuff together at this point, and so I'm applauding him for the efforts on that. But any other questions related to that, though?
Okay, so we have this comprehensive policy. So one of the steps in there is that none will be approved until we do further research.
I wouldn't suggest making that part of the policy. I mean, I think you could adopt the policy. I mean, there's a couple different thoughts I have here. One is that the policy could be far reaching. In other words, an overall policy and not necessarily drilling into details. It's a way that you would prefer to handle it. You could set some guide rails if you wanted to as a board, like, Brent's talked about. I think you asked the question about financing the initial purchase cost. If that's a non-negotiable for the board, you just flat say it. But generally policies are a little bit more broad-based. Here's some things that we do want to do, don't want to do. Here's some factors that will be looked at. And the way that Brent has drafted this, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's right now, it's a pretty broad-based approach. It could certainly be made more specific if that's the will of the board. But I don't think you can just decide on a policy on Wednesday that's going to act as a denial for any of these that come forward until we amend it. So it's a little different than the zoning context of the moratorium.
Well, this hurts every taxpayer that has a home right now that they're paying taxes on, because they're going to pick up the bill for this. This hurts every developer that's not in an RHID, because they're going to have specials. This hurts the fire department because in the future we cannot get a payment in lieu of taxes. This hurts the county. So you're telling me that we're going to have to the policy that put together is a great starting point, but I don't know it's the ending point that we've got. So how do we say no right now, or we have to hear these things every time, go through a lot of staff rigmarole, when this is the worst thing that could happen to this county as far as property tax? I just got another phone call. I talk about the phone calls I get all the time with taxpayers that are going to lose their home because the property value is going up. 77-year-old man called me the other day. He's retired and he can't afford his property tax. What do I tell him? Well, I want you to pay more tax because all of these developers over here that want RHID, they don't want to pay any and they want to make money. So how do I justify that?
Certainly, Commissioner Dennis, I think you make some very good points that when you talk about the adverse effect under the statutes that are in place, they can probably support denial on many, if not all, RHID projects because of some of the concerns that have been expressed in terms of overall impact to taxpayers, the county as an organization. So I think you certainly have that ability. But in terms of function, how it works under the statutes, I'm looking to Tom Henry to see if he's going to nod or shake his head at any of this. But by statute, when they have one of these hearings, we have 30 days to make a determination on the adverse effect after the city would have their hearing. And so we don't have a way to just make a pre-decision. I think we would have to take each of those up. There's no obligation that you have to have it in front of you, but the default, if you don't put it in front of the board, is that it's an approval by not having it on there. So that's why I would say that I don't think a moratorium can be a substitute for that. I would imagine that if you said no to the first one or two of these, that if that was the position of the board and there was a pretty strong viewpoint from the board, that other cities may not see fit to bring these in front of you.
Okay, one of the things Brent mentioned is time limit. So if we put a 1-year time limit, can't be extended. Right in our policy. If they can't meet that, then it's automatically denied. I don't see anybody that ever come to us with a 1-year time limit.
That may be a good presumption.
Right.
I would defer.
And I think that one of the things, Commissioner, that you're right, this is a starting point, but I think to have something drafted that shows that we really don't like these unless you can really prove a point will probably stop a lot of them from getting those open-ended ones to us. And so I think that's the thing, is this is also a communication tool to the municipalities in the county. We can share this with them and say, talk to us if you're thinking about one, and we can get it to a point that maybe it works or it won't work for them and won't work for us, and it doesn't come all the way to the commission.
Well, we just started the meeting today with discussing a couple things that the legislature wants to do for property tax, because the public it's the most hated tax we have. That the public is clamoring for something to reduce property tax, and yet we're looking at something that's going to increase property tax on everybody outside the RHID.
What is the time frame here? Why do we have to have this on Wednesday? Is there I have a lot of heartburn walking into a Wednesday meeting of something of this magnitude. And I'm just trying to tell you, we need housing units in this community in the worst way. We need affordable housing. We need all housing units in this community. And I see my map in my district with the infill opportunities here. I mean, I want to try to find as many economic tools to incentivize housing development as we can, but I want to make sure that it doesn't happen without an incentive. Part of the adverse effect is we have to make sure that this is something that happens. If there's not an incentive, can we still get that sort of infill opportunity? I'll tell you, in Mays, we have 1,800 housing units being developed right now. So it's not stopping the rates, the inflationary cost, but are they the right housing units? I mean, we're having duplexes built where the rent rate's going to be $1,750. That's not affordable. So I don't know yet if we're able to build affordable housing units to meet the incredible need that we have. And I don't know if I'm going to have that information by Wednesday.
I think with or without a policy, an RHID could begin to move through the process. As I said, this is just something that's, if you've got concerns that you want cities to think about as they're crafting a potential policy, we can put them in there and communicate that information. So it's, I think that's the purpose of the policy. There's nothing magic about Wednesday, it being because they'll still have to bring us stuff. We would determine whether or not it has adverse effect. This just gives them a little bit more guideline on the things that you would favor or disfavor.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brent, for your red pencil, I will have a couple of comments. I think adverse effect is incredibly important. So we can, what you've heard, there's already, but I think it's important that the history of rural changing to reinvestment really bothers me, and then all of a sudden it opens up the gates. And I think the original intent of rural was good, and there's a 23 change. So in a way, I kind of would like it to be on our maybe our agenda for legislative agenda for next year to help clean that up. But I lean okay with urban infill in areas that need it, that already have infrastructure there. I think it'd be minimum, and that value is zero today, or very minimal. And it's not going to, those would take the but for issue. And I don't think we should have anything to do with suburban growth or sprawl, whatever you want to call it. There's plenty of that, as Commissioner Dennis has said. We could almost limit it to urban infill only in areas of need that for sure hit the but for area. And then I don't want it, or I would suggest we not let it overlap any existing incentive district. Just eliminate that. And then lastly, I would say that I've mentioned it before, we kind of follow maybe our existing incentive program of capping it at 10 years instead of, and it's a 5 + 5. We review it in 5, and future commissioners could agree to not let the remaining 5 go. So that's my red pencil suggestions.
Yeah.
Pending.
I'll tell you, I will tell you that part of where this came from was actually a discussion from Homelessness Task Force, the housing subdivision, as we looked at opportunities to take the rural housing program and say, hey, we need significant housing. Are there ways to create a similar program for?
I think that would, what you're saying as well is it would incentivize investors to go anywhere but infill, because it's more valuable to go other areas. And we should drive this to infill in areas. In area, not necessarily in Wichita, there could be infill areas anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This would be a great conversation for SCAC, by the way, to hear what our 20 cities in Sedgwick County think.
Thank you for a chance to speak. So I'm just curious, how many TIF districts are in Sedgwick County? I know we have a list. There wasn't nearly as many as I thought. 6 or 7
now.
12?
12 TIF districts in the county.
And on each one of those, the county either was silent or in most cases probably spoke to them and probably voted for them. I know that's been my personal my personal idea is that I don't want to do things without speaking to it. I would rather be on record and voting for or against whichever. So, and for the record, maybe I felt like a moderate this morning because I have supported most of these. In fact, I can think of just two incentives that I have not supported. And the reason I didn't support those two, one of them upset the free market. It was a market competition thing where there was the tip incentivized one business over another across the street from each other. I would think that was bad, but it went forward anyway. And that was before I was a commissioner. The other one was basically the but-for wasn't real. There was no but-for. It simply was a benefit to someone. And frankly, they failed to provide evidence that this was something that was necessary. So I didn't support that one. And that it basically went away. But having said that, to Commissioner Dennis's point, every one of these TIF districts, in a sense, has the same component where the increment is used to pay off government bonds for some type of improvement around that project. And assuming that it rolls, that incentive will be stopped at some point in the future, then the tax value then does support the government services. But for a time, other taxpayers are covering the costs for the services while that incentive is in place. Right. I think most commissioners have supported these, and IRBs are essentially the same thing, where the taxes are not being collected by government or government services. We're providing, if you will, a reason for us to provide, that incentive because we want the jobs or whatever it is. So commissioners have been historically supportive of these things when it makes sense. And I think that's my moderate viewpoint. If it makes sense, I'll support it. To me, the but-for is the biggest part of this. And so let me make a couple of other quick points here. This is not about affordable housing. I listened to Senate Bill 17 hearing from 2023, sent that out to a few people. They never mentioned affordable housing at one time. It's not what this is about.
They didn't.
That's not what this is. We can make it that. I think if we're going to get involved in this, that probably should be maybe our focus here, but that's really not what Senate Bill 17 was about. And that's really not what this is about. So that's one truth. The second truth I would say is this is not to lower the rent or to lower the market value of a home buyer. That's not what this is. They're going to market these at market value, and they're going to rent these at market value. So if they build an apartment, it's going to be $1,500, $1,600 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. That's just what they're going for these days. That's not going to change. If there was an incentive to the occupant because they need affordable housing, that's not what this does. Okay. So the properties impacted by this incentive are still going to be at market rate. And then the last thing I would say is, to my earlier comments, for developers to get involved in building properties that we desperately need, they have a profit motive, which is fine. There's nothing immoral about that. They have a right to make money, and I want them to be successful. I want them to be able to put a business project forward that on paper makes sense. They think that if everything works for their plan, they're going to make X percent profit on the project. And to that point, I have my idea on how to solve this. I guess I would be more interested in supporting this if I had two things. One thing is I want them to provide that project plan with their application. I want to know that they're going to, again, I don't want them to make 80% profit. That's too much. I don't want them to break even or lose money. That's not reasonable. The question is, what's reasonable? If their project plan says, if everything falls in place, if the specials are paid for through this incentive, I'm going to make, again, I'm not sure what the right number is, to say 15% profit or whatever the number would be. And here's my plan. And that demonstrates a but-for. So if without the incentive, they don't make any money, if they can demonstrate that through a fiscal analysis and say, here's my application, here's my data, here's why I need the incentive, that provides a but-for that's documented. I'd be more interested in that if that was the situation. They bring us an application that says I'm going to make 60% profit. I'd probably be like, well, you may not need the incentive. If they come in and say, well, that's the incentive, I can't do the project because it doesn't work on paper. There's no way to do this. I'd probably want to support it. So to me, that but-for is substantiated with, if you will, a application that includes that type of data. That to me gets me to be supportive of it. I'm not sure they want to do that, but I think that might be our requirement. It says when you apply for this, you have to provide that data to us for us to understand the but-for is real. That ought to be our requirement. And the second thing is, I think Commissioner Meister's already basically said this, but I want to suspend the incentive when the specials or whatever the money is intended to cover. Once that is made whole, the incentive needs to be suspended. So I want that to be part of the approval that I would be willing to support. I don't want this to go on forever and simply provide, if you will, additional dollars to flow into areas we have no idea what we're doing. It should be for something specific and have a limit as to when it would end. So those are my two criteria. Those two things I'd be supportive.
And thinking further, so if we did a 10-year cap, we approve an RFID or RHID program, that 10-year, in my opinion, that 10-year cap sets for that district. So they start one and you said they could bring another one and another one. Well, we have 10-year cap on that district. So we're going to review that whole district in 5 years to approve it to go for the balancing 5 is in theory. But we don't want it to start over.
I agree.
With a new.
Exactly. I think a couple of ways to handle that. One is that they do give us that initial development plan when they provide us with the application, but we would limit. I think the project or the development plan has to encompass the entire district, and then you can accomplish that. You can accomplish that time limit, and maybe it's up to 5 plus up to 5, or in the event that we've satisfied because of a lot of growth, the costs, it could be cut off sooner. So we can track it both in terms of dollars and time.
Brent, hate to interrupt. I have Senator Marshall's in town for a roundtable at 11, so I need to leave for that. Commissioner Lopez is going to walk us through, but I do think it'd be pertinent to hear from the clerk's office, the appraiser's office, and SC2. So, and I'll catch up online, but I think it'd be important to hear your feedback on some of these things. It's a big decision. It's a big program. So, but anyways, thanks.
I don't know who wants to come up if you guys want to address.
Now they're going to shoot me down.
Mark Clark, County Appraiser. I just want to say I never had so many opportunities to stand on a podium. Back in 2008, there was a developer who gave us some detailed information, and it was on entry-level homes. And an entry-level home was 978 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, unfinished basement, and 2-car garage. And the cost of that was between $99,000 and $115,000. And that was going to be the sale price. In 2021, house with the same features cost $225,000 to $230,000. That is the sale price. That is pretty astronomical. Now, you're talking about these RHIDs, and I didn't get a phone call, but I know somebody who did. But I did get an email, and it's from somebody who used to work here, and that is Michael O'Donnell. He said that he has, he's representing somebody, has mobile home park, and they are now developing a new type of mobile home, which is currently being built. And supposedly it isn't being built anywhere else. It will be specifically for an RHID. And so I told him that he wanted to know the difference between real and personal property on a manufactured home. And I also told him that it was important that he also visit with MABCD because in order to have a real property manufactured home, the land, the manufactured home has to be in the same name, but it also needs a permanent foundation. So Chris Labram called me Friday night and he was laughing. He said, "Somebody called me." I said, "Oh, well, I think I know who that might be." And sure enough, it was Mr. O'Donnell, and they had a conversation. So I think it's important when we have these things that offices collaborate and work together very closely, have a safety net so that when these things do come, things don't fall through the crack. I know Brent does a fantastic job of these things, but when you're dealing with certain people, I think it's just good when we can all work together and make sure that certain things don't happen, like sometimes they do happen. And I'll leave that all by yourself because you probably know what I'm talking about there with some people. Also, there's something else, and that there was for the city of Wichita. As so, there's about 7 acres in the city of Wichita. Then there's something brewing out in Goddard. Don't have the information there, but that is supposed to be sizable. I'm not sure if it's inside the city limits or just outside of the city limits, but I'm thinking, okay, if it's just outside the city limits and Goddard's going to do that, looks like that might be a possible annexation. I'd also say that when it comes to these types of districts, our office has a history of not inflating these districts. Years ago, when the city of Wichita started their TIF districts, and Jerry Franz and several other people from our office, we met with the city and we just let it be known that we weren't going to artificially make these things work. Market value is what we do. And that was understood. So that'll be the same course of action here. When it comes to administrative, I mean, we're going to capture that base value. We want to make sure that we work closely with the other offices. And at the same time, we want to keep a close eye on these districts every year, but we want to make sure that this fits efficiently within our reinspection cycles so that we can go out there and make sure that we're getting the most up-to-date information and so forth. And I'll leave that for now. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Our office has been looking at these for a little bit now since they came into play this past year. And this is not the only county that's looking at this too. We've had other county clerks that are more in the populated areas reaching out to us, wanting to know, hey, what are you guys doing? What are you guys looking at? Because they have the exact same thing happening there. There's developers starting to pop up and there's no rules on them yet. Well, policy, I should say. So anyway, so we've done a little bit of research and work on this, and I'll let Karen take over because she has a few comments and probably a few questions as well.
Good morning. I guess one of the questions that I've had come from Garden Plain. That was the first one that we were notified from Garden Plain back in November. They're planning to build a apartment complex at Main Street and Old Highway 54. And my understanding from the city administrator is that they intend to reimburse the developer for his costs, which I take it to mean the building. And I don't know if that's something that we want to have in our policy, what type of costs you would reimburse exactly. Couple questions that I've come up with. If the boundary of the city is adjacent, like Goddard and Wichita are adjacent at 167th Street. And we know already that Goddard wants to have at least one, if not several of these RHIDs. Does that mean that the city of Wichita could protest theirs because they're adjacent? Or is it within 3 miles of the RHID? I don't know if you know that. It's within the 3 miles of the district. Okay.
The Wichita would be eligible to approve or deny it under these rules if it's within 3 miles. But besides Sedgwick County.
Yeah, then Wichita would, in that case,
to allow Wichita.
The proposed district is at the half mile between 183rd and 199th. And their boundary is 167th. So it would be within the 3 miles. Question to the commissioners or the attorney. I'm sorry. Did you need to answer?
Just Commissioner Meissner, to the 3 miles within the district, that is in the statute. Yes.
What about people who might be displaced? Are you going to allow cities to use eminent domain to come in and reinvest, infill, and tear down existing people's homes to build duplexes or apartment buildings? Is that something that you want in your policy? And
I will say that the statute does say that land acquisition under the statute can't be accomplished by eminent domain.
oh, good.
So
I'm glad to hear that. Sorry, I haven't read the whole statute, so. And I guess where Brent did discuss if Goddard were to bring some large factory or some type of manufacturing, which they've been trying since I worked there 20 years ago. If they create this incentive for that to bring in housing, are we going to be sure that use of taxpayer dollars creates incentive, that we don't want to use taxpayer dollars to create incentive districts which don't comply with federal guidelines like EPA standards or water standards or something that would set us back in another format? I don't know that that's something that could be added to RHID, but I think it's something to think about if they're planning to bring a manufacturing in. I haven't heard any of that discussion as part of the Goddard plan, but times change. So those are some of my questions. This is a really big deal for the county. I wish we'd have realized it last year when we saw RHID in the legislature. I'm sorry, I didn't pay more attention to it. But our software is looking at how we can make these reporting procedures, and they have some type of a presentation for us in about 3 weeks. So I'm glad to hear that. I started them on it back in November when we saw this coming through, and we do so much manually for TIF districts. I don't want the clerk's office to be stuck doing manual for RHIDs, because if 1 or 2 of these do get approved, it's going to blossom around the county. We know that. So we want to be prepared for that. And I wanted to change what the acronym is, because to me, it's Retirement Incentive District, just so I can say that out loud.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
There is this might be for Kelly or Karen. There's a legislative bill. I'm not sure the bill number, but Lindsay knows, I'm sure. 468 that deals with, so there's some type of a legislative threat that says if we have these types of incentives in place, that we somehow, there's a calculation that says it changes how we levy taxes, I guess, to other taxpayers or something. You understand what that is? And can you please explain that?
So yeah, 468.
468.
Yeah. The bill went through the Senate Tax Committee, and what that does, they originally had 2 components to it. One, which would be IRBs. The other one was TIF districts. They removed the TIF district part of that in committee, left the IRBs. Essentially what it says is if a city or local government or whoever approves, blesses, there's about four words that they use, any type of IRB. And I don't know if there's additional things beyond IRBs that in there, because it does talk about some statutory language in there, that if they do, then that city and a county are held at R&R for that year that they approve it. So they approve it 1 year, they're held at R&R. They can go back above R&R the next year unless they approve another one in that year. So essentially, it will eliminate, industrial revenue bonds. And Lindsay, I don't know if you know the additional.
I think it just said economic development abatements.
It says,
so I don't know.
And that's what I was trying to figure out. What is that defined as?
I think it's references specific statutes that are incorporated, but I don't recall what those are off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I was told by someone that 468 probably isn't going to go anywhere, that it's a dead bill. Do we believe that's dead, or do we think there's got?
It got pushed out of committee, so it's sitting below the line in the Senate. My concern on stuff like this, that's a little bit more controversial, is what is used as negotiation leverage in CCRs at the end of the year.
Well, if it passes the Senate, it becomes conferenceable to the tax bill at the end of the day. So I wouldn't say it's dead. And I think in how this relates to RHID is not clear.
No.
Someone else can verify that one way or the other. I don't think it's clear.
We haven't really drilled down into what other economic incentives this covers. We've kind of focused mainly on the TIF and the IRB aspect
I
of
tell
it.
you, between the TIF and IRB, I think that the TIF is more egregious than IRBs, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, and they removed the TIFs because they believed that the way it taxed was different than what they're trying to do. They're trying to prevent local governments from, giving, a corporation or whoever taxpayer dollars and pushing, just kind of what we've talked about, pushing those costs onto other ones. TIFs is a little bit different on that, and so they removed that. And so
Didn't Panasonic just get some good stuff from the state of Kansas? I thought they did.
about $1 billion.
Only, yeah. I'm just curious how they. Someone please explain the logic behind that. Never mind. Thank you.
Yeah, I would reach out to Karen Tyson. So, but yeah, so it is concerned that if, local government, how many governments have to approve an IRB that would be held to R&R. So.
Rusty, did you want to add anything? I know Brady mentioned fire district.
I don't know that I have a lot to add at this point. It's an interesting concept. It's obviously this map not all encompassing. These are still available to rural and smaller municipalities. Seemingly not fitting the same. Are they within the same rules as would be in the urban area?
Yes.
They've got to be within a certain population level.
But all the 19 cities outside of Wichita are under 60,000 in population, so they're all eligible.
What's interesting outside the city limits of Wichita, areas that are constituents of and taxpayers into the fire district, as we hear pushback or at least inquiries from those communities about the mill levy required to support the operations of the fire district to serve that large area and the businesses and residents within that area. As they defer taxes and reduce the available collections that the fire district might not allow the fire district to lower their mill levies at some point in the future. But then they enter into TIFs and IRBs and these types of tax deferrals on very large commercial developments and now as well as residential, that it becomes a challenge for the fire district with the increases in the cost of living, the cost of labor, the cost of equipment, to maintain a level of service that the communities desire whenever the available funds to fund them are deferred for 10, 25 years or longer. Beyond that, within the city of Wichita, I think it makes sense to some degree, the infill strategy as we see urban sprawl, it taxes our REMS. Not so much the fire district, they cover what they cover. It's just a matter of how many structures they have to worry about in roadways, how many accidents they have to respond to, medical responses. But EMS is tasked more heavily as urban sprawl occurs. We worry about response times. Sometimes they are not relevant to the medical need, but they are still a measure. And the more sprawl we have outside the city limits of the city of Wichita, then the greater the tax burden to increase the number of EMS units. So there's many concerns with this on many levels. And it is on some level pushing responsibility for support of these public safety entities on other taxpayers whenever taxes are deferred on certain developments for long periods of time.
I have two quick questions. Have we informed or asked and had a conversation with the realtors, the builders, or the chamber on these? By the way, not just RHID, but I think the two constitutional amendments also. I think if they really understand what's going on, they would probably take a position.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
So just this morning, I contacted Jason and Jessica on two constitutional resolutions. Jason did indicate that the realtors are engaging on those two resolutions. So he did mention that. The other thing that I might mention is he did say if we do want to contact our South Central delegation, that we're we can certainly reach out to them, but if we want to send some kind of communication to the South Central delegation, well, he can coordinate that for us. So I don't know if we want to send them, our testimony with some additional communication to the delegation as well. So.
And my final question, hopefully my final question. Do we know if this is something that's happening, this RHID, is this something that's unique to Kansas now, or is this something that happens outside the state of Kansas? Now, secondly, what are other municipalities doing? I was told by someone that Joco is in fact embracing this. They're doing this without any reservation, it sounds like. And if that's true, again, I think sometimes government does a lot of dumb things, but if they're going to do it, at least you want to do it across the board and be fair to everybody. And we compete. So if Joco is going to get involved in doing this, we compete with other municipalities to make sure businesses want to be here or people want to live here, that type of thing. I want to be left out of doing what is considered regular relationship with government. Again, even though I think it may be a bad idea, I don't want to be naive to think this isn't happening around us. So I guess my question would be other states as well as within the state of Kansas. What are other people doing with RHID?
We can check and see. I have not looked outside the state boundaries. One of the things we did talk about was this needs to encourage regional competitiveness. That's one of the little bullet points in the policy.
The only other thing I would add, just food for thought, is it makes sense out in rural communities where we've got a lot of ghost towns in Kansas. Saw a show on PBS not too long ago about all the ghost towns, and it makes sense to help grow those small communities. The question for me, from a public safety standpoint, and Commissioner Beatty's point on the need for affordable housing, is within the city, MABCD has been deferring permitting costs within some of these specific areas that are on this map for infill. They've deferred close to $250,000 over the past 2.5 years since that's been in effect. A lot of those were small projects that will be coming to an end in October, and I don't think there's any desire to continue that program because it hasn't really resulted in a lot of new construction or significant renovation. The question is, within that urban area, will this be a but-for situation, and are we going to improve the quality of life of people living in those neighborhoods? Or is this simply going to be a gentrification action that displaces those people into other areas that still require services? It doesn't improve their quality of life. It doesn't increase their ability to gain employment. It just displaces and puts them in a different area that we then have to concentrate public safety resources and social service resources in a different area.
Okay. Well, I haven't spoken a whole lot on this, but I'll just say that I can see potential in something like this, but I don't think we are anywhere near ready to be able to move forward with something to approve anything anyway. I still have a lot of questions that would need to be answered. I need to make sure that this is not going to be, and it's really hit a really strong statement to me, which people are already being taxed out of their homes and putting this burden on them. There would have to be a lot that comes with that for me to feel comfortable, even like having that discussion on what that would look like. So I think there's a lot more that we still need to work on this before, and we can talk about this on Wednesday, but I don't think we're going to be ready to pass anything. I know there are some projects in the works, but I at least am not comfortable passing anything at this point. I do appreciate all of the things that Commissioner Meitzner mentioned with the cities and kind of limiting things like that. I very seriously would like to look at some of those things before I would be ready going forward. But if anybody else has anything to add.
Thanks for summarizing. Would what we've discussed, and you've got a draft of a quasi policy that's got some good stuff in it, consistent with some of our comments, and others are open-ended. Does that allow you to share with other communities? This is a direction it looks like we're leaning. Do you have enough information, or do we need Wednesday is going to come, and I don't seeing the I don't think we have our hands around it Wednesday, and so I don't want to overpromise to a city that, hey, you're going to see a policy.
I think as a practical matter, we can incorporate these into some talking points. Maybe we go to this Sedgwick County Association of Cities and discuss this. And that's a way to communicate that. The statute gives you the ability to nullify any in the meantime until you have policy. So as a practical matter, with or without this, you can nullify or allow one to happen.
Okay, so regardless of what happens Wednesday, if a municipality wants to bring us something in whatever time frame they want to bring it, we have 30 days to review and
Correct.
make it. That's a case by case versus a policy, but
Mhm. And the policy is still
fine.
going to require case by case looking at each one of these.
true.
So,
And that's probably something,
so
an
if we
appeal
wanna
process might be something.
Yeah. So maybe that,
Okay.
that communication with the association helps.
I just want to make sure you've got what you need.
So are we going to bring a policy? We're going to have a discussion? You want to defer this? Tell me where we're headed for Wednesday, I guess. What are we thinking about that?
Do you have enough information from all of the feedback you got to make some major revisions to what you have to tighten this thing up?
Sure.
Well, I think we probably,
Options, if you summarize that and said items to be determined or options discussed or something.
I don't know if it would pass on Wednesday at this point, depending on what kind of revisions that you make, but at least the public should be aware from the staff meeting today, but they'll definitely be aware of what's going on with a board meeting. So I think that the word would get out even in greater detail if we could still keep it on the agenda.
If it's on the agenda, you'll have the opportunity to have a fuller discussion and Brent can make some adjustments based on what he's heard today. So.
Well, good. Well, we're down to 2 commissioners. So I've been elected to.
Okay, well, let's get some stuff done.
But Lindsay has a couple things that she'd like to bring up today.
Well, and I promise I will be very quick. So we do have 3 policies on next week's agenda. I'm sorry, on April 3rd's agenda, a debt management policy, a CIP policy, and an investment policy. Now, your investment policy is only going to change with regard to debt. So what I have at each of your seats now is the policy that we talked about at your retreat. Nothing has changed in it, except it's in a modern format. But at that time, you all had questions about some of the new benchmarks and computations. And so we have worked with our municipal advisor to give you a second packet. And that basically puts all of the numbers into one document so you can see how it was computed. That was the only follow-up question that you had at the time. So I'm giving that to you now. I'm going to get with Tom as soon as he is back to see if I can either do 2-2-1s with you or maybe get on one of the next couple of BOCC staff meetings so that we can talk through this policy, just refresh you on what was proposed at that time and how these computations apply. To quickly go over the CIP policy itself, although from your all's perspective, there's absolutely nothing that changes except for one very small scope change. So that will take very little time. And then we'll also, like I said, talk about that investment policy that now speaks specifically to how we invest debt proceeds. The bulk of that time is going to be spent talking about this. So I just want to give you a chance to look at this ahead of time if you have any desire. If not, I will get time with you to brief you on it, but I didn't want to hold off and leave you hanging on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Anything from the commissioners?
Question. So do we have a red line? Is it just one or 2 changes or?
We do have a red line. The most significant changes, there's a couple of updates to like terminology, but really the only major change is section 4, the maximum amounts of debt financing. And so, yes, I will get you a red line.
Well, I mean, if it's just.
But it's a major swap out. We're taking out those 5 measures that we had before where it takes debt per capita for us plus debt per capita for every other taxing entity in the county. And then same thing for percent of fair market value of property. We take those out and replace it with how S&P evaluates us as a AAA. We're using their scoring. And so that's what we have now codified. And then because it is such a different change, that's why we gave you this packet with the computations. so that you can kind of see how we're looking at it now versus how we looked at it before. But yes, I will have a red line prepared when we meet with you.
All right, this is my first bite at this apple. I'm not sure what I'm looking at. If you could
So-
maybe one.
Sure.
two on.
So if you flip over to the bottom of page 2 in that policy, that's at your seat, the one that looks like this. It says debt management / financing. At the bottom, it says maximum amounts of debt financing, and it talks about when we're going to issue new debt, what we're going to take into account is the preservation of our credit rating and the tax burden that we're putting on citizens. And then to that end, at the top of page 3, it talks about 3 measures that we're going to evaluate against. So the first is budgetary flexibility. We want it to be at least 20% with a target of 30%. Really aligns with our current fund balance policy. Then, so on this page, that looks like, that has the computations in it. This section 1 at the top shows that for 2022, we had a actual available fund balance of 69 million. Our total general fund expenditures were actually 198 million. So that shows that we were at 35%. And so relative to this percentage of at least 20% with a target of 30%, we exceed that. That is S&P's first measure of whether we preserve our AAA. And then the narrative underneath that just explains where that came from and why that matters. So then number 2 in the policy is liquidity is maintained with total available cash of at least 120% of total governmental fund debt. So that also would include the fire district. And at least 20% of total governmental fund expenditures. So then you can see at the bottom of this page in the gray boxes, it shows what those values are and how that's computed. And so you can see that we are well above 120%. When we look at the 17.3 million, that's what that gives us. And we're at 14.4. And then when we look at 20% of total expenditures, that's 73 million. And of course, we're well above that. And then finally, number 3 in your policy says debt levels are controlled by maintaining net direct debt at less than 60% of governmental funds revenue and total governmental funds debt service at less than 8% of expenditures. And so the bottom of this computation sheet shows our actual numbers and how those compute out. So that's what this is aimed at doing, is just showing you the math behind these. This, like I said, this policy is identical to what you saw at the retreat. We just now are giving you the math behind it because there had been some questions about how that actually works. So I will find time to get into this in more depth with you between now and April 3rd. But I just wanted to make sure you had time to look at it because it is complicated. And I do want to give you the opportunity to ask questions before we hit you with this in 2 weeks.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. It looks like we can control each of these 3 items, and that's also how we're evaluated on. In the past, looking at the 5 items, some of those we had absolutely no control over, like total debt for the entire county.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to get evaluated on something that we have absolutely no control over. So thanks for looking at this.
Sure.
Okay. Commissioner
Thank
Howell.
you. Appreciate that. Which of these criteria gets to the issue of debt capacity?
That is what you're going to see at number 3, where it speaks to debt levels are controlled by maintaining net direct debt at less than 60% of total governmental funds revenue. But really the crux of it is that second part, total governmental funds debt service at least less than 8% of total expenditures. And that is what S&P requires to have a AAA credit rating. So it's actually above and beyond even what the state would require. Or even what some of our prior policies would have authorized.
But the words total governmental includes other governments besides Sedgwick County.
No, total, it's our governmental funds.
Okay,
So that's a GAAP standard, a generally accepted accounting principles. We have a definition of governmental funds. That's how it's defined in our act for our annual comprehensive financial report. So that's all it's looking at.
So the term total governmental is defined in the policy to be Sedgwick County specifically.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's not all county funds. It's only those that are considered governmental funds. So for example, MABCD is now an enterprise fund. We wouldn't get credit for that because that's not a governmental fund.
So that 8% number,
Mhm.
when I first got here, I remember the policy at one time it had been 20% and it was at 14% when I got here. during Richard Ranzau's time, he lowered it down to 10. I think we tried to get to 8 and
We
then,
did get to 8.
and I think we repealed that. And is this the number we're talking about? Is that
That-
something entirely different?
It is, it is quite different because that was looking at budgeted general fund and debt service expenses, just those two funds.
Right?
This looking at more funds than that. But it's also not looking at budget, it's looking at actual expenditures. So remember, we never spend a whole budget, right? That's just a spending limit. So this is looking at actual.
So this policy replaces that entire idea. There's
Yes.
that. So to compare this with that, where would this, I mean, I hate to even ask the question, but if we were to use the old definition, where is that, where would we be on that old scale?
I would have to look, based on, because this is based on actuals, it's probably fairly comparable. But now we're also having to count fire district leases as part of our debt, whereas before we didn't. And so I'll dig into it to get you a better answer, but it's going to be complicated. They're not going to be apples to apples.
I guess I just want to make sure that if, by changing definitions, if you will, a way to look at this, I don't want to be, I guess, unaware that we're doing that. I think
Right.
that is, I want to be very aware of that. And then in terms of our, and it's actually a little hard to find the data. I know that you have a great job in the budget book, but it's not as easy as a simple question here. Our total debt at one moment in time, if you remove special assessments and look at what our debt load is currently, I would love to keep track of that. So I'm not sure where that is exactly.
So that will be presented in your next audit report. And so you should get that, I believe, May 15th or 22nd are our target dates. And we have that table in the back that shows the 10-year history of our debt service load and takes that into account. We'll be able to show it to you then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything else from the commission? Staff? Any of the other electives, anything? Okay, Tim, I'll give it back to you then.
We're done. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I guess we're good.
You guys want to another time? Or you, sir?